All right, day 3 of not being in the NCAA tournament. Feels
Mm.
empty. Feels empty. Nothing to look forward to here except for next season, Tim. And that's exactly what we're going to do on today's show. We're going to continue our exit interview series. Someone who came on really strong towards the end of the season, Symir Torrence. We're going to break down what we saw from him in the early going, what he can improve on for next year, and is he going to be the starting point guard for this 2022-2023 Syracuse team? That's all coming up next.
Are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up and welcome in. This is the Locked On Syracuse Podcast. I'm Tyler Aki. He's Tim Leonard, talking all things Syracuse with you every single weekday, Monday through Friday. Only place to get daily Syracuse podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available on all platforms. That includes YouTube, so subscribe to the show there. Like the video, comment. We love talking with you guys on the YouTube channel. Also, find us wherever else you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, the Odyssey app, and we are on Twitter at LO_Syracuse, tweeting along this summer and all the recruiting news that may come out and getting you ready for football as well, because that'll be here before you know it. Spring football will be here before you know it, Tim.
Unreal.
But we do have to continue with our exit interview series. We did Joe Girard yesterday. So if you missed that, that was a really fun conversation breaking down Girard, what he's going to look like next year. Is he going to be moving to the 2 guard? And that kind of segues in pretty nicely to the guy we're talking about today, Symir Torrence, who, because of necessity, had to start or at least play extended minutes through a number of the final games this season for the Orange. And let's just say this, the Symir Torrence we saw in game 1 was far from the Symir Torrence we saw in game 30 for SU. And you look at his numbers from this season, I don't think they really do him justice. 2.6 points per game, a little less than 3 assists per game. And again, you're not going to really see any of the defensive metrics that he brought to the table show out because of the limited sample size. But when he went out there and when he was given the opportunity to play extended minutes at the end of the season, boy, was he an impact guy. I mean, in the ACC tournament, he averaged 8 points to go along with 10 assists. Is he going to average 8 and 10 every game next year? No, probably not. But you feel a lot more confident in your point guard situation heading into next season after seeing Symir Torrence in the ACC tournament this year.
Yeah, I feel like next year, when outside of Syracuse, people are doing write-ups on what Syracuse is going to be like and trying to find a spot to rank them in the preseason rankings, or if it's just an ACC media writer trying to figure out where Syracuse should be slotted in the preseason poll, they're going to look and be like, oh, this Torrence guy who averaged 2 points and did nothing at Marquette is now all of a sudden supposed to be their starter. But if you look deeper and, like us, you've been following the program, you understand that he really did make some strides. And he got to play 40 minutes against Duke, the toughest team in the conference, in a big game in the ACC tournament, and he had 11 assists. He also had 6 rebounds in that game, 7 points. He was 2 for 9 shooting.
Was on.
Yeah, he was really solid in the ACC tournament and played like a point guard, played like that role that we've been missing. I don't know how much he's going to expand his game offensively, because it feels like he did some of that this year. And I don't know if the jump shot is fixable to the point that it's going to become an asset next year. Just looking at his free throw numbers, I mean, he was 50% from the foul line this year. Wasn't there a ton, but career 62% foul shooter, usually a good indicator that maybe your shot needs some work. And we're kind of at the point of his career where I don't know if he's going to get to that point. He was technically 41% from 3. He was 3 for 8 on the season, but a lot of those were just late in shot clock type of stuff.
Right. And I guess the one saving grace with the free throw numbers is when he was getting a lot of run towards the end of the season, he finished the year 5 of 7. So that's not awful. It's certainly better than 50%. So you'll take that. But I look at Symir, and especially on the defensive side of the basketball, he was one of Syracuse's best defenders this season. And I think that when he is given more minutes, because remember, one thing we saw in the ACC tournament a little bit too, he bumped down to play the wing spot on the zone. And that's something, the positional flexibility that he could bring out there, where you can continue to maybe play a 3-guard lineup next season. If it looks like Symir, Justin Taylor, and Joe Girard, we could see that 3-guard lineup somewhere next season. And if Symir gives you the positional flexibility to throw him on the back line, despite the fact that he's just 6'3", and I thought he did a really good job when he was given that limited sample. I believe it was in the Duke game, but he was cutting guys off baseline. He was getting out to contest shots. He was making people attempt really tough shots on the perimeter. That positional flexibility, I think, is going to go a long way next year.
Yeah, I think he even did it in the Florida State game as well, the first game of the ACC tournament too. So he feels like a guy that's probably a better man-to-man defender than a zone defender, and that's not a knock on him. I just think you need size at the top of the zone. That's a big part of getting deflections and getting steals. And even the way he guarded Alan Griffin when they did the triangle in 2, I know Alan Griffin, according to Coach K, had food poisoning, and that's the reason why the game was close, of course. That was his excuse after the game. He had to have one, but he pretty much watched Alan Griffin and was staying connected to him almost in a man-to-man type of role. And it felt like he was kind of like shutting him off like a lacrosse player or something, where he was good enough defensively to, despite Alan Griffin having a size advantage and weight advantage and all that, Alan Griffin was not a factor in that first half and really in the entire game when they were doing that defense.
By the way, food poisoning is the go-to excuse.
Yes.
Because you can't really trace it.
Right.
You can just kind of say it happened, and then boom, within a day or two, you're good to go.
And you're right back to it. So, like, if you come back to work the next day, I mean, everyone knows this,
like,
but
sorry,
then
bro,
you can look
food
fine.
poisoning. Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. It can knock you on your ass for a day, but after that, you're good to go. So well done by Coach K, but he knows what he's doing there.
Right.
Anyway, getting back to Symir, though, I think the one thing, actually, I'll save this little tidbit for a little bit later, but defensively, yeah, I think when you talk about him from a man-to-man standpoint, you're right. I think he is a better man-to-man defender, but you saw those man-to-man principles come out when he played zone, because he did a lot of man-to-man stuff, like I was kind of alluding to, like shutting guys off baseline and getting out and contesting shooters. Like, he was doing man-to-man principles, which is why he's still an effective zone defender. But like you said, he doesn't have necessarily the unteachables per se. He's certainly going to be one of the more athletic players on the floor for Syracuse next season once again. But I think using some of those man-to-man principles really helped him thrive as a zone defender too.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the stats, it's not great. I wonder, what do you think we should expect from him statistically next season? And maybe that's a deeper conversation that we should address later on in the podcast. But it feels like, to me, he can only go so much up in points per game, as much as he did make strides. And I know I was on him throughout the season about his lack of finishing at the rim, and that did get better. He's still not the most efficient player at the rim, like in college basketball or something. Like, it's still, he went from bad to maybe slightly below average. So competition's only going to be tougher next year. In the points per game department, I don't see him ever becoming a double-digit points per game guy. I mean, we're talking about someone that is career high over 3 years is 9 points. But also, I don't think that really matters for what we're trying to get out of Symir next year. And I think he could have a great year and average 5 or 6 points per game.
Right. Well, let's get into that next, because I think you're spot on right there when you talk about that. Hey, I love March Madness. I love those brackets, but I can't remember the last time I actually went deep or even won any money. So that's why I'm hedging my bets this year with Stat Heroes NCAA Pick'em contest. Stat Heroes NCAA single game pick'ems pits the star players against each other in an amazing hybrid between fantasy and sports gambling. Take control back from those handicappers that always seem to have the advantage and start focusing on the players you know best, with a gameplay that doesn't rely on big spreads, long odds, or funky props. Stat Hero gives you the advantage, resulting in their gamers winning 4 times more often, because Stat Hero eliminates the mystery about who or what you are going up against. In addition to their pick'em games, they also have dozens of lineups you can come through to take on head-to-head. They simply post sets of players for you to take on with a set of players that you choose. Stat Hero is the easiest and fastest way to get your sports action fix on. It is what daily fantasy was meant to be. So sign up for free right now at stathero.com/lockedon and use that promo code lockedon for a 100% deposit match. That's stathero.com/lockedon. Use promo code lockedon for a 100% deposit match. Stathero.com/lockedon. Promo code lockedon. Terms and conditions apply.
Also, want to tell you guys about Built Bar. It's that time of the year where I've pretty much given up on all my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. Have you tried the Built Bar Puffs yet? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of the best tasting Built Bars out there. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat. And they're covered in 100% real chocolate. You can go to built.com and scroll down the macros chart. You'll be blown away. These Built Bars have high protein, low calorie, high fiber, low carbs. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. You compare that to a candy bar, which is pretty much what they taste like. Those usually have around 240 calories, but 30 grams of sugar and dozens of net carbs. So it's a huge difference. You are literally tasting a candy bar, and it's also good for you as well. You go to built.com today, use promo code LOCKED15, get 15% off your order. Again, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com.
So getting into what Symir's role will look like for next year, what his next steps are, you brought it up. Like, he still has a long way to go to be some sort of offensive threat in terms of scoring the basketball. And I think you're right. Not only do I think he won't necessarily get there, but I don't think he needs to get there either, because from a facilitating standpoint, I saw everything I needed to see in those last couple of games. And let's not forget, you were doing that without 2 of your best scorers from a season ago when he had that 11 assist game against Duke. You did that without Buddy Boeheim and without Jesse Edwards. And I'm really intrigued to see what the Symir Torrence, Jesse Edwards pick and roll is going to look like, because that to me is something we didn't see a lot of, because it felt like whenever Symir was on the floor, Frank was on the floor. Right. And we never really got a hefty dose of Symir and Jesse. But I mean, he had 11 assists in this game. Imagine if Jesse was playing. I mean, you could have been looking at maybe a 15 assist game out there.
Yeah, my only thing on this is I feel like, to kind of play devil's advocate, maybe he does need to get at least a little bit better offensively so that as we get deeper into the season, teams aren't just scouting him and saying, you know what, we're just not going to ever come off and help on that guy when he drives, or we're going to sag off him. And when he's in the role he was in this year, coming off the bench, I think, you know, teams understand who he is, especially in the league. But when he's a starter next year, all of a sudden you're at the top of the scouting report, and the guys might have a better idea of, okay, this guy can beat us off the pass, but let's try and make him shoot. So that's where he's gotten better. And if he continues to get better, then that opens up the passing more, because everything we talked about this year, Syracuse has such great spacing for drivers. It doesn't necessarily yield to a lot of drive and kick, because the guys they had on this year's, or now I can call it last year's roster, were shooters. And we talked about this a lot over the course of the season, but guys just weren't leaving Buddy Boeheim, Joe Girard, Cole on the perimeter, because they understood that's where Syracuse wanted to get their shots.
Right. I do think, though, and I said this a couple times throughout the season as well, Symir Torrence, nobody from the moment game 1 started to the moment the final horn of the Duke game in the ACC tournament, nobody improved more in my eyes than Symir Torrence. And I know some people say Jesse. No, Jesse's improvements came in the summer, and he was ready to go right away from the get-go. He had all those really big games.
Is when he popped. Really.
Right, exactly. That's when we saw,
yeah.
All right, yep, this is who Jesse Edwards is going to be this year. So over the course of the entire season, I thought nobody improved more than Symir, whether it was defensively, whether it was facilitating. And the biggest thing for both you and I mean, he couldn't hit a layup in those first couple of games. And then at the end of the season, he was getting to the rim and finishing, and even making some tough shots, getting to the free throw line too from some and ones as well. I saw drastic improvements there. And I know he did a lot of work with Devo too. Again, I don't think the shot's ever going to come around, but you're right. He has to be a threat at the rim. And I think he started to show that at the end of the season. And if he's going to be a threat at the rim, well, imagine what he can do with Jesse with some lobs and stuff, where he comes off a screen, gets a little bit deeper, and then boom, you have to have that bigger defender step up and try to contest a Symir shot. But what does he do? He'll lob it or drop one through the other side of the lane to a guy like Jesse Edwards. It's certainly intriguing. And I think all of the bigs are going to be better next season as a result of potentially having Symir Torrence as your starting point guard. And if it's not Symir Torrence as your starting point guard, it means that there's somebody better that's going to be your starter next season.
Yeah, so against Tier A competition last year from 2-point range, according to Ken Palm, he was 9 for 26, 34%. I feel like that's a stat that needs to increase. He's just got to be a little bit more efficient. But to your point, he's got the hard part down already, which is getting to the basket. He was really good at getting to good looks, just didn't convert on them. Some other interesting advanced metrics on him. His assist rate would have been the highest in the ACC and would have been 14th in the country if he was eligible for playing the amount of time that you need to. 37.5 assist rate. That's outrageously high.
Yeah.
Alondas Williams led the ACC with right around 31. His turnover rate very high as well, though, and he's been very high throughout his career.
Yeah.
Turnover rate wise, 22.0 turnover rate was actually slightly higher than Girard's this year, which might surprise some people. His first year at Marquette, he was a 31 turnover rate, dropped down to a 25, then a 22. So he's trending in the right direction, opposite of Girard. But I don't know. I mean, that number surprised me. You think of him as such a sure-handed, good at getting the ball across pressure type of player. I wonder about those two numbers. It's small sample size. So how much do we buy into him is the first thing. But also, it concerns me a little bit to see a turnover rate that high from a guy that's considered to be the better of the two options in terms of taking care of the basketball that we have coming back next year.
Well, here's why I think that number, not just for this season, but even for his entire career, is skewed. And it is the thing you brought up of sample size, because I mean, you go out there for 6 minutes and you commit a turnover. Well, boom. I don't know what the exact percentage would be, but it would be a really high turnover rate that you would accrue as a result of that. So, and look at how many games he played, only 5, 4, 6, 8 minutes. He goes out and commits a turnover in that sample. And keep in mind too, when he did that, he would sometimes get the hook as a result of it and never go back into the basketball game as well.
Yeah.
So you're sitting there, you're dwelling on that turnover. It's certainly not going to do anything. But when he's playing loose and playing with extended minutes, I'm looking through some of these games. So that first Duke game, he got 25 minutes of action, did not turn the ball over. The Florida State game where he played 29 minutes, he had 1 turnover. And then the last Duke game where he played all 40, he had 2. So you're looking at 3 of his largest outputs in terms of minutes from this season. Yeah, they were his 3 largest minutes outputs this season. And he had a combined 3 turnovers in that stretch. When he's playing loose and when he knows that he's not necessarily going to be subbed for, he plays a little bit better and he takes better care of the basketball too. And I think that's important when we look at next season, because there may not be someone breathing down his neck for minutes from the point guard spot. Symir is going to be, I think, well ahead of where Kadir Copeland is going to be. And that's not to say Copeland won't be a good player at some point for the Orange, but I think heading into next season, unless there's a transfer that is brought in at the point guard spot, expect Symir Torrence to be your starting point guard. And with extended run, I think we'll see him take a little bit better care of the basketball.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the eye test supports that he is good at taking care of the basketball.
I mean, just look at any time Syracuse got pressed. He was the guy that you trusted the most to get it up.
Yeah, and it's interesting because eye test and the consensus of the fan base is he's a much better defender and he's much better at taking care of the basketball than Joe Girard. The advanced numbers that you can find out there actually say Girard was better defensively than him, and Girard was a little bit better turnover rate wise, which again, I'm just presenting it. I don't necessarily think that means much, but I'm just throwing it out there as something that is worth consideration, basically, because
you're comparing a guy with 400 at bats to a guy with 100 at bats.
Yeah,
is what,
and
you're
that
doing
might not even be
right.
Like it might be more than that. It's crazy. And when we did see him get the 400 at bats or get a full game at the plate, we saw 11 assists compared to 2 turnovers against Duke. We saw 9 assists in 29 minutes against Florida State. So eye test again tells you that this is going to be a much better season than he put up. But when you dive into his numbers, it's not. That goes back to what I was saying. I think an ACC objective media member who's covering Florida State is going to.
You can say it, Brendan Marks. Say it,
Brendan Marks. Sure. He's going to be like, oh, Symir Torrence is your starting point guard. That's a nightmare. But a Syracuse fan is going to say, no. We haven't had a starting point guard that's an actual point guard in 4 or 5 years. This is as good as it's going to get for us basically right now. So that's just whichever side comes out on top, we'll see. But I think that's how it's going to play out in the offseason.
Let's get into some more of his fit, what next year looks like for Symir, the next steps, other things we want to see him improve on as well. That's coming up in just a second. But first, this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it is impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You've got computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. So save time and money and use Rock Auto. Why spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership when you've got Rock Auto? They're a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and their prices are reliably low for every single customer. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to all of your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck, and be sure to write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Again, that's the important part. Write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit them at rockauto.com. So getting a little bit more into Symir's role next season and how he kind of fits into Syracuse. And I think the other burning question we need to answer in all of these exit interviews is, how does this player help Syracuse get to the NCAA tournament next year? Because that needs to be the goal for this team in what could be Jim Boeheim's final season as well. So getting into what his role looks like, I don't know about you, but barring some major transfer splash, Symir Torrence is your point guard for next season, your starting point guard. And I feel way better about it on March 16th, talking with you now, than I may have even felt as early or as late as February 16th, talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's maybe a world where you add a forward or a guard. Maybe you add a 2 guard, and then he's better than Symir. So then, like a transfer portal type addition. So then Jim Boeheim just resorts to Joe at the point guard again, and maybe Swider comes back, and you've got Swider, Benny, Frank, or Jesse, I should say, as your front court. But yeah, I agree with you. For the most part, as it stands right now, betting favorite to be the starting point guard next year is Symir Torrence. The question is, to me, like how good can you be with the backcourt of Torrence and Girard? And I say that, can you make the NCAA tournament? I think so. But can you be better than a bubble team with that backcourt? And I think a lot of fans are coming off the high of the Duke game, and they're really believing in it. And we joked about how everyone flipped on Girard really quickly, and all of a sudden it seems like he's he's in the good graces of the fan base. But
that's the perfect way to go out, though, because now you've got an entire offseason of being in the good graces for both him and Torrence.
Yeah, and even Jimmy Boeheim, his lasting mark is as good, and he was hated all season long. And
think about it. Every single sort of Syracuse punching bag played phenomenal in that final game. Like even Frank, and you brought up Jimmy and Joe and Symir, like all those dudes played so well in that final game. They've got an entire summer of being showered with praise now.
And the Heimer coached maybe his best game of the season, and it looked like he was going to bring them out of the ashes to an ACC tournament run again, and everyone was going to buy in for a second. But I agree. I think, I'll pose the question to you. Do you think they can be a top 25 team next year with the backcourt of Symir Torrence and Joe Girard?
Steps need to be made. Yeah, steps would have to be made.
I would say a lot. I mean, I'm not ruling it out because anything's possible, but I still think there's some limitations with both guys. Are they better as a unit together, more cohesive than the Buddy Joe mix? Yes. But at the same time, there's no denying that going from Buddy to Joe, which got you to 16 and 17, and they weren't the only players on the court, but still going from Buddy to Joe to Symir and Joe is a drop off. It just is.
Yes. Oh, 1000%. And it's not even close. But I will say this, if this is going to be a top 25 team next year, it's not going to be necessarily because of those two in the backcourt. They will not be the best players on your team. It will be because Benny takes his step or you make a big splash in the transfer portal. Those guys will be the headline grabbers, and they will just be really nice parts of a supporting cast. I don't think this team becomes a top 25 team because Joe and Symir, unless there's a mega step taken. And I just don't know if you can really take a mega step with those guys and some of the limitations that you see in their games that you can't necessarily improve over a summer. So I'm with you. they're probably not going to be a top 25 team unless Benny takes a monster step, which is in the cards. I would say it's more likely that Benny takes that step to get them to be a top 25 team than either one of them taking a step to be a top 25 team next season. In terms of how does Symir help get this team to the NCAA tournament next season, he just needs to be a steady force. He just needs to be a guy game after game you can count on. If you're being pressured, he can get the ball over the timeline. He can facilitate. He can set up other guys. I think this team can be an NCAA tournament team next year if Symir is averaging 6 assists per game. Like, I think he's a real contender to lead the ACC in assists next year.
Yeah, I mean, that assist rate I gave out is no joke. I think he probably falls in the neighborhood of like 6.5 points, 5 assists per game, if I had to guess. But it's all just a total guess right now. And it depends on how the other pieces around him work and if they add or lose certain pieces this year. I think we're looking at him as probably the starter next year. And like we said after the Duke game, if you would have told me in the middle of the season, it is Torrence, Girard as your starting backcourt next year, I would have been like, all right, when do I buy my NIT tickets? like this is a disaster.
Are we even hosting? Like, are we even going to be hosting an NIT game?
Right. Like, it's just, I hope we make it to the NIT would have been, and I'm talking about, in the Georgetown time period, maybe, or maybe early ACC play, because I just never really saw Symir Torrence as having a ceiling high enough to be an ACC starter. I still don't really see it, but also I understand that he serves a role where he doesn't really need to reach his ceiling. And if he plays like he's just played in the Duke game consistently for an entire season, that's still a valuable piece. It probably limits you in terms of making it to the top 25. Like, I think if we're being honest, there's a reason why they're still going after Judah Mintz. There's a reason why they go out to Sky Clark, because they understand that Torrence is a solid point guard. But in order to be back to the level they want to get to, they probably need a guy that's a little bit more talented or just a better scorer than him.
Higher ceiling.
Yeah, higher ceiling. But I understand now that the ceiling conversation doesn't matter a ton. He doesn't need to reach his ceiling for Syracuse to make the NCAA tournament next year. Just him being him helps Girard be him as well, and that helps Syracuse just function better as a team.
I think that's the perfect way to put it. He helps everyone be themselves a little bit better, be the best version of themselves. And listen, if he goes out there next year and averages 6.5 points and 6 assists, he's not going to be the most improved player, but you're going to hear a lot of Syracuse fans bang the drum for him to be the most improved player in the ACC just because of the steadiness. He won't be most improved player averaging 6.5 points. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
But I think his impact, and if you really would study it, he would probably be among the top 2 or 3 guys that probably would deserve it. And I think I'm excited to see how he makes some of these other pieces better, because it's weird, but he really didn't. It feels like he's not going to have played with a lot of these guys for next season, I should say, because you're bringing in a whole haul of freshmen, and you're probably going to bring in a transfer here, a transfer there. It never felt like he was on the floor at the same time as Jesse Edwards. And even with the guy like Cole Swider, there were times it felt like he wasn't on the floor with Cole, or he would come in and sub in for Joe at times in games. It felt like he was never the guy out there on the floor with the guys he's going to be playing with a lot next year. And that's sort of exciting to me because of what he could bring and how he could expand other players' roles.
Yeah, you hit it on the head earlier. With him and Jesse in a pick and roll is as good as we're going to get in terms of a passing point guard and a finishing center in recent memory. And that's 2 things we've really lacked in recent memory. So it's going to be exciting to watch that. He did finish in shot quality on the team 8th percentile last year in shot quality, which again is just another advanced number that the Brendan Marks of the world are going to look at and say, oh, this guy has no shot of being good. But these advanced numbers, you can fall into a trap. We talked about this with Buddy, where when you look at his advanced stuff, maybe it supports him being 2nd or 3rd team all ACC, but you got to watch the games. You got to understand that Buddy was being face guarded and double teamed and all this, and was still getting off tough shots and still led the conference in scoring. So I'm just, again, throwing it out there. Like, the advanced numbers don't support that Symir Torrence is ready to be your starting point guard next year, but I still think he, again, doesn't have to take that much of a leap for Syracuse to make the NCAA tournament.
Right. And again, you look at a number of players their advanced numbers, when you see breakout players in particular, their advanced numbers the year before don't necessarily suggest that they're supposed to be great players the next
Right.
season. All that stuff kind of happens in the summer. And I think that Symir is going to be one of those guys who's going to be in the gym with Devo a lot this summer. He already was this season. And I think you started to see some of those dividends pay off towards the end of the year. And we saw what Devo did with Buddy. Like, he turned him into a killer.
GMAC too. I mean,
and GMAC.
Just the entire coaching staff deserves some credit for Torrence, because I didn't think he would reach this level this quickly in terms of scoring.
Right. So I'm excited to see the next step of Torrence. He is certainly going to be one of my 2 or 3 most intriguing players heading into next season. So I'm looking forward to that. One of the other most intriguing players for next season is Benny Williams. And that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. That is tomorrow's exit interview. We're going to dive into Benny, the season that was for him, or really wasn't in the eyes of a lot of Syracuse fans, of course, cut down because of injury. So we'll dive into that and how Benny Williams will help this team get to the NCAA tournament next season, because at the end of the day, that's really all that matters in the eyes of the fans. So for Tim, I'm Tyler. We'll talk all things Benny Williams with you tomorrow.